of owning a cafe, and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tristero. Chapter 129, The Trial, Part 4. Watching as Same Queena's face rapidly fell from preening to sheepishly concerned to downright worried, her legal team whispering hurriedly to each other as NG continued a stoic retelling of actually harrowing events, Shouta was struggling to keep his scowl and ire in check. At least he's doing a good job of digging his own grave. Well, the metaphorical one anyway, right? Curling the army hat around Dabi a little tighter, the eatery owner sighed. When I next see Kudo-san, I want whatever jail time they've written into the plea deal to be troubled. He told him, the other smile strengthening a touch. Huh, sounds good, the younger replied before returning his attention back to his tablet. The second Endeavor started talking about the Toya he knew and the circumstances concerning his death. The teenager had returned to drawing. He'd be sure to raise that with the young man's UA-based therapist before he went to his next session. And by misgivings, how do you mean?
Objection, Your Honor, leading the witness.
Feeling his brows twitch, Marai tightened the fold of his arms as Kudo-san waved off the sharp-corked woman whose colleagues were muttering and hurriedly writing things down. It looked as though their strategy of pitching the pro's testimony against that of his ex-wife wasn't working out as they'd hoped, was it? Sustained. Understood, Date-sama. Now, Endeavor-san, why weren't the authorities, other than the fire services, called when Sokoto Peak was set ablaze? Hadn't Toya told you that that was where he was going? Isn't that where you'd promised to meet him? The ochre-haired lawyer pushed. I never promised to meet him there. The hero blinked, a flash of shock momentarily ghosting across his face as the judge's third eye wavered between green and amber. Oh, that bastard! Please answer the question.
Objection!
Same-san closed and yelped.
I know, they're still trying to leave my client, Your Honor.
Overruled. The lilac-skinned man cut her off, his body looming forward ominously. This is a vital question pertaining to the latter charges brought by the police force on Himura-san's behalf, he reminded as the gray-skinned woman tried to smile, her head bowing as she sat. And Never-san, if you would. Slowly leveling his golden gaze towards the formerly flame-bearded man, Mirai felt his teeth grit. If the South Korean camera crew were fixed on him right now, then he was sure he looked pretty pissed off. I didn't contact the police at the time, because Toya was prone to tantrums. He'd set our training area alight despite me, and my decision to send him to that school for his own good. The brawny male grunted. If I'd have thought even for a second that he'd actively tried to harm himself, then of course I would have treated the incident more seriously. He furthered, and bewilderingly, Date-sama's eye did revert to green. It wasn't until my housekeeper reported to me that Toya hadn't joined Fuyumi and Natsuo for dinner that I realized something was amiss. Amiss? Kubo-san cut in, those cerulean eyes sparking. Your son had spoken to you that morning, hadn't he? You'd argued over your treatment of Shoto.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance?
Knowing why Todoroki Toya was in a heightened emotional state, to the point where he created a blaze which exceeded, according to the fire department, 2,000 Celsius, must be relevant because at the time he was a 15-year-old boy, a minor. How could you think that he'd gotten out of there unharmed? Toshinori's lawyer continued, their tone angry and accusatory, until Date-sama's gavel rang out within the expensive chamber. Same-san's objection is overruled, he stated as the sidekicks murmured and NG's team started to sweat. Endeavor-san, Kubo-san raises a good point. Answer the question. He ordered, his third eye keenly leveled at the former pro. I didn't believe that he was or ever had been at the center of the fire, the bastard replied after a thick swallow. I'd thought at the time that he'd been burning the trees. We used them for target practice. He'd caused small forest fires before. He added then, with a sigh, I went looking for him that night and found nothing. I believed that he needed time to cool off, and since he had no one to turn to and nowhere to go, I was sure he'd come back in the morning for breakfast. He told the room at large. And how long was it, sir, before you finally called the police? 5 days. As gasps rattled around the jury, Mirai exhaled a deep breath, his gaze flickering from Same's team to the group of people, the sidekicks across from him. He didn't feel the kind of elation he hoped he would when Vernon blinked at him, her face pale. No, we just felt numb. There'd be no winners here. There could be no winners in this mess. 5 days, the lead prosecutor repeated. You know, I would ask you to explain your reasoning behind that, but I genuinely don't want to hear it.
Objection, Your Honor. They're trying to influence the jury.
Sustained. Nate-sama agreed, his green eye narrowing a touch. Do you have any further questions for the defendant, Kubo-san? No, Your Honor, the sharply dressed attorney stated firmly. However, I would like to call Aizawa Dabi to the stand.
Your Honor, may we approach the bench, please?
Frowning lightly, Mirai didn't like the way Kuina was gesticulating, her shark's tail flicking erratically. What could she possibly want to do now? Hadn't her client just destroyed any credibility he'd had in the eyes of everyone here? What kind of monster saw a despairing child creating a forest fire as a fucking tantrum? What father, even a shitty one, wouldn't be worried sick about their son and his emotional state? God, that bastard had never deserved Ray or his kids, and he felt awful for not having used his quirk on him, even in secret, on the multiple times their agencies had to partner up. If only he had looked at him. Maybe he could have stepped in before Dabi was scarred both emotionally and physically. Maybe he could have orchestrated his own investigation, because investigations were his specialty. Even though both his nephew and Ray had promised him they held no ill will, after sitting here listening and watching all of this, he would have to wrestle within himself in the same that he'd often grumbled at Toshinori for doing. Knowing that he could have done something, knowing that he could have been somewhere where he was needed, but he wasn't. Just like Shouta, he found himself wishing to have a chance to revisit their time at the restaurant that fateful night. He was certain that between the two of them, Enji would never have gotten on that plane to China. But still, there was no changing reality, and now that Ray was well, now that they'd put so much in place for her, she was ready to be a mom again. She was stable, happy, and the younger kids hadn't had to witness her darker moments, her despair. No, now they just had a woman to help them deal with their own inner demons, and she was doing an amazing job. They all felt certain that so long as the younger children wanted it, they could move into one of the many apartments overlooking the Noronago Cafe that his best friend was buying before Christmas. Their family finally whole, happy, and free. God, the image of such a thing at least helped him to sleep at night. Giving Dabi a hug, he also ruffled both of their hair.
Go kick ass, Dad.
I love you, okay? And I love you, Dabi. I love both of you and Tomro. I'm enacting the cuddle protocol on his behalf, okay? He said, his smile spreading when Dabi huffed as the ivory-haired youth latched onto his lover.
Understood,
he replied seriously, whilst the flame quirk user made a pretty poor job fending him off, the tension in his shoulder evaporating. Such good kids. Then, his mind ruthlessly shoving his personal feelings aside, he followed their non-binary prosecutor through the veritable maze that was the back rooms of this expansive high court building. Aizawa-san, not to pry, but... Kubo-san grinned as they made their approach. What is the cuddle protocol, exactly? Shoving the tension in his own shoulders lightening a touch, Shouta slanted a gaze at the definitely interested person striding beside him. It's, well, in our family and wider circle of friends, many of us have had unconventional childhoods, so sometimes we don't realize when we need physical touch and affection. He admitted, his shoulders shrugging. After talking about it, we decided that if we saw any of our family or community in need of such a thing, and they were too stressed or overwhelmed to know and understand that that was what they needed then, to help, we'd offer to enact that as a protocol. He chuckled, an actual smile touching his lips. Everyone has the right to refuse with no hard feelings, of course, but more often than not, that kind of affection is exactly what the person needed at the time. They just didn't realize it. I might be one of the primary beneficiaries, though, you know. He furthered, his cheeks pinking a little despite himself.
Not that he was embarrassed, not at all.
He was beyond glad that they'd all agreed to such a thing. He couldn't be happier that they were communicating and thinking about each other, even if Toshinori, Nomori, and Atsuhiro enjoyed invoking the protocol just because they wanted a hug from someone whenever the feeling took them. They were pretty damn good at cuddling, too, weren't they? Whoa, the attorney blinked. That sounds pretty amazing. they admitted, their eyes glittering. Ma, we should make a law out of this, don't you think? Sat in the witness box, Shouta regarded Same Quina coolly. He knew what kind of bullshit she'd be spouting, and he was ready for it.
Aizawa-san,
She began, her needle-toothed smile wide but nervous. He couldn't blame her, really. He wouldn't represent that flaming pile of shit if his life depended on it.
when did you first come to meet your word, Aizawa Dabi?
2 years ago, at bay, he replied, his tone blunt, his expression dispassionate.
And when exactly did Amit approach you and him about his vendetta against...
Objection, Your Honor, speculation and bias, Kubo-san snapped, their scowl deepening. This is purely hearsay on the defense's part. They furthered, there was no evidence, subjective or otherwise, to support Same-san's claims.
Other than witness testimony, Judge.
The charcoal-permed woman snipped her hand, pointing at him grandly.
If Aizawa-san has nothing to hide, as the prosecution claims, then he should be more than happy to refute these questions, shouldn't he?
Overruled. Date-sama allowed. All those three eyes turned to him. Please answer the question, he stated, the look they shared telling him that the older man had a very good idea about what his honest answer would be. Being a judge meant having to put up with some bullshit, didn't it? All might never approached me about any vendetta, endeavor-related or otherwise. He replied demurely. When the judge's third eye continued to glow green, he saw the Todoroki bastard pale.
Ha! Good! So you're denying that Amit approached you to target Aizawa-san?
Yes. He returned, his tone blunt, his words true. The look on Kasame Kuina's face was priceless. Hell, he almost felt sorry for her. Almost.
But under the Official Secrets Act, which we've had partially rescinded for the purposes of this trial, you can't deny that you were hired by someone to undermine the number 2 hero, can you?
She pushed her smile wavering. Yes, I can deny that, he replied, Date-sama's quirk never wavering from the green light of truth, as the attorney faltered, her legal team cursing and muttering behind her.
But when you first met and assaulted Todoroki-sama at a pro-friendly restaurant, you...
If you're referring to the time when Sir Madai very kindly treated me to a meal at an incredibly exclusive eatery, as the very dear friend of mine he is, a time when Endeavor approached us and intruded upon our time together, then I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I threw water on him to avoid the sprinkler system being activated. He assured, it was an incredibly high-end establishment, and many people were still eating. He offered blandly, if you review the security footage, you'll see that the survey staff were trying to usher customers to safety, as his quirk further manifested. I just wanted to avoid adding water damage to the complaints the staff would have had to suffer regardless. He quipped. Again, the judge's quirk proved he wasn't lying.
Oh, really?
Kuina close to sneered before her head inclining at Endeavor. He felt his brows lift as the other nodded at her. The smirk he wore was razor sharp.